I was just using it, and it just quit.
What did you do to my saw? Did you put it together properly?
I hope so. I'm gonna review that footage.
Well, here we are, Stihl 034 Super, Part 3. If you've watched Part 1 and 2, this will make total sense to you. If you haven't seen them, you should go back and watch them first, and then watch this one. So we bought this saw in the beer store parking lot for $50. No bar, no chain, no clutch cover, no bar studs. It was missing a few things. And the guy we bought it from said when he got the saw, it was locked up and he replaced a piston ring. So in part 2, we took the saw all apart. We had the piston and cylinder off of it, replaced the crank seals. We pressure vac test this thing. We replaced the oil pump line and completely serviced it. We took it outside to cut with it, and it seized up on us in the woodpile. So in this video, we are going to dig until we find the problem. Let's go. Let's pull the bar and chain off this. So what do you guys think happened here? Maybe it's the clutch. That'd be good news. Maybe it's something really bad. So the chain is turning no problem. Well, let's dump the fuel out of this. I know there was some speculation in the comments as to whether I put mixed or straight gas in this. Pretty sure I put mixed gas in it, but we'll dump it out. So that there is fuel mixed with Stihl oil. Not Stihl Ultra. It's made by Castrol, blended here in Canada for Stihl Canada. Okay, so we didn't straight gas it. We can eliminate that. Well, let's take this side apart and see if we can find any visible damage. Well, the clutch looks like it's in one piece. Okay, well, let's pull the recoil off of this next. What is going on here? Okay, so I don't know what the chances are that our saw is locked up and our recoil is broken at the same time. That's a strange one. So I can turn this one way, but not the other. I don't want to turn it too far back that way because I don't want to mess up whatever has this locked up. So we've got a broken recoil. Are these related? Don't know. Judging by where the magnet is to the coil, it looks like we are at top dead center. Okay, let's keep digging. Do I dare look in there? Well, that didn't look good. Let's pull the carb off this, pull the muffler off it, and let's pull that cylinder off. What did Tyler do to my saw? I think he owes me an 034 now. He'll have to get on the old Facebook Marketplace and find me another one.
Oh, that's pieces of rings.
I had to leave the shop this day to go and pick up a dress and some other chainsaws, and this is what I come home to. What did he do to this saw? Okay, let's pop that cylinder off. Here's a look in the exhaust port. Wow, look at that damage. Took a chunk right out of it. I don't want any pieces falling down into the bottom end, so I'm just gonna plug those couple holes up with some towel, just so that nothing goes down in there. There's pieces of piston and piston ring everywhere. Here's our cylinder. You can see chunks of the piston up there. Dented up. Circlip. There's a piece of ring. So that would be what the clinking was before this thing shut off on us. Tyler, what do you have to say for yourself?
Well, the evidence is not looking good in my favor. So, I'd like to address the jury. This ring package was opened previously, so I guess we don't really know technically if they were steel rings. I'm sure they were, and I'm sure the warranty is expired on these rings. Another thing that got by me was this piston OEM or aftermarket? And someone in the comments mentioned that circlip. And it kind of crossed my mind at the time, but must not have rang the right bell. That is not a Stihl circlip. That's a Stihl circlip. I got it out of the package. And on the other side, it has the same Stihl circlip with no hook on it, which is really nice if you're using pliers. And what's this piston say? I should have looked at this the first time. Gulf. I've heard of that brand. I'm not a fan of aftermarket pistons and cylinders, but still, I still don't understand what did this. Now that scoring is a result of the rings or the piston breaking. I can see that. So what went wrong? Now, when I was running the saw, it didn't tell me it was, I didn't think it was lean. It wasn't revving too high. I didn't think it was running lean. Now my hearing protection is pretty good. I don't hear everything when they're running, but nothing told me it was running lean. It was hot that day. So one thing I'm wondering is my Stihl rings, which are probably OEM, maybe they don't fit in this aftermarket piston properly, and maybe I didn't notice. So, like, actually, look at the slot in that ring. I don't like that. That's pretty sloppy looking. So this is the aftermarket ring that came out. Just give it a measure. 0, 58 thousandths. OEM ring, 46. That's a big difference. I'm not a machinist, but it sounds like a pretty big difference. I don't think there was anything wrong with the ring end gap. I've never had a problem with Stihl rings and ring end gap. Lesson learned. So if this was a customer saw, which I've done many of, the only way we rebuild saws for customers is piston and cylinder assemblies from Stihl, not aftermarket. And that would be the only way I would do it. For my personal saws, I've done these things many times. Clean the cylinder, clean up the OEM piston, put a new set of rings on. Like that's a brand new 036 piston and cylinder set. So I'm not quite sure which saw is going to get that just yet. Might be this one, might not be. So I think it was the piston. So ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I rest my case. I'm going to blame it on the piston. I don't think it was leaning out. It was pretty hot that day. I have heard Stihl does manufacture their pistons differently than aftermarket companies. I don't know Gulf. I've heard of it. Let's blame it on the piston.
Tyler, after 3 minutes of deliberation, the jury finds you guilty in all counts of chainsaw abuse. The silicone job you did to this carburetor most likely caused this saw to seize up. Guards, escort this man back to chainsaw repair school. Court's adjourned.
Okay, so after 2 hours of excruciating punishment. I got thinking, the ring not fitting in the groove of the piston. What could happen? The piston going up and down? Yeah, I guess, but what else could happen is exactly what I thought of outside. See the ring and the locating pin goes right underneath it and spins. It just got past me. I didn't even think of it. Should have measured. All my fault. Aftermarket piston, OEM rings, just they didn't mesh up. Look at that. That's horrible. I should have caught that. It's a locating pin. That's the OEM ring. It was installed correctly. And then as it was running, it started turning until it either the upper ring or the lower ring caught a port, broke. Don't know which one failed first. That would take a whole lot more thinking outside while weed eating. I do my best thinking while I'm outside trimming grass and brush. Look at that. Totally Tyler's fault. I'm going back to training. Maybe I'll see his again someday.
In light of this new evidence, we still find you guilty, just not as guilty. You know that Stihl stamps their logo in their pistons, right? Court is adjourned. There's more weeds to be trimmed. Well, it is the next day here. Last night, after we discovered what was wrong with this saw, I went on Amazon and I ordered a Chinese piston and cylinder kit. So we're going to go ahead and pop a new piston and cylinder into this thing, take it outside, and run it with that silicone carb on it. So I have the Stihl OEM piston and cylinder here. These are very expensive. I think they retail for about $500. And I'm just not 100% sure, and I'm not willing to risk this. So I paid, I think, $49 for this Chinese kit, and we're going to install it and see what happens. I can stomach losing this better than I can stomach losing this. And we will then find out how this carburetor works with this new piston and cylinder. If you missed the last episode about this chainsaw, we had this carb apart and we had a leak that we couldn't get rid of. So we ended up applying some silicone to try to seal this thing up. I don't like this carb, but it's what we have right now. So we are going to rebuild the saw and put this carb on it and see what happens. So let's see what all comes in this kit from China. We have a new cylinder, we have a new piston, a new crankcase gasket, which we won't be using, an intake boot, which we won't be using, a wrist pin, which we will use, crank bearings, we won't be using them, a new spark plug, We won't be using that. New rings, circlips, decompression valve, cylinder gasket. We'll just use the OEM cylinder gasket. Don't need that. Comes with a couple crank seals. We won't be using these. We've already replaced the crank seals in this with OEM Stihl crank seals. Exhaust gasket. We've already got a new exhaust gasket. And the wrist pin bearing, we're not going to use that. We're just going to use the good OEM one. And actually, we are going to use this plug because this new cylinder has a decompression valve hole in it, but this saw does not have, it did not have a decompression valve and doesn't have the hole for it. So we'll just plug that up. Okay, so we're going to use that stuff and won't be using any of this. So before I install anything, I'm going to start by just giving this stuff just a little wipe down and blow out. I don't know what their cleaning procedures are there. I don't know, if there's metal fragments. The side of this piston has some kind of gunk stuck to it. I just came out of the box with that on it. So I'll get this stuff cleaned up and then we'll start putting this saw back together. There's our circlips. Okay, we've got those all wiped down, blown out. We're going to install the piston rings that came with the kit. Okay, so on your piston, you have an arrow on the top, and that arrow points towards your exhaust port. Okay, so when you're putting it in your saw, it's going on like this. You have these locating pins. Those are piston ring locating pins. So they are there to keep the piston ring from turning. Now, what happened when the saw blew up on us? As you could see, the piston and the piston rings we used, they weren't a good match. And the piston rings turned, went past this locating pin, and got caught on the exhaust port. And did this. Okay, so we're going to put our piston rings in place. Your locating pin will be in the center of your ring opening. Okay, so let's get started here. We'll start by installing our piston rings. So there's our first ring installed. When you install your piston rings, you want to make sure to not put them on upside down. Okay, so you see how they meet around the pin. Let's install this circlip. You can see our circlip down in there. So as for these circlips that came with the aftermarket kit, I have decided that I'm not going to install these. I'm going to use Stihl OEM circlips. I did install one already in this side. You can probably see it in there. It fits very good. If I put the wrist pin in, it holds it in. I can apply some pressure to it and it holds it in well. I just feel better using those and it does seem to fit good. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. One's in, we'll install this and replace the other circlip with an OEM one as well. We'll leave these out. There sometimes is an issue when you start mixing aftermarket parts with OEM parts, as we've seen when this thing seized up on us. There is a risk of not proper fitment. So if you're going to put OEM circlips or piston rings on an aftermarket piston, you just want to have a really good look at it and make sure everything fits well. I have heard people say that some Stihl OEM circlips do not fit aftermarket pistons well, but this one seems to fit well. So there's my other Stihl OEM circlip. I've got some two-stroke oil here. We're going to use this for lubrication as we put this thing back together. I'm going to oil up the wrist pin bearing before I install the piston. I'm going to use the OEM one. The kit did come with one, but I trust that OEM bearing better. So I'll put some oil on it. Get this in here where you can see it. Okay, so arrow facing the exhaust. We're going to use the wrist pin that came with the kit. Okay, so the wrist pin is in. I'll put this block in. Now we're going to install that second circlip. There, so that circlip is in place and the wrist pin won't slide out either way. When this thing gets hot, let's just hope that wrist pin stays in place. Maybe we'll blow it up again. Okay, we'll get this piston and rings lubricated and then we're going to pop our new cylinder on. So just two-stroke oil. Let's put our intake boot on our cylinder. We're going to use the Stihl OEM intake boot. Okay, so I've got our intake boot on here. Make sure it's seated properly, and then we're just going to tighten that clamp. The service manual says to tighten this until there's 3 to 4 millimeters between this and this. So there, that is tightened down. We'll lubricate in there well, and we'll get this thing mounted. I just pulled the handle off this saw. It's only 4 screws, and it makes it a whole lot easier to work on with the handle off. And I also took the wooden block out and just put a thinner block under the piston. Okay, so our cylinder, just going to put some two-stroke in here. Just use my finger and lube this up really well. So the cylinder is lubricated inside. The piston and rings are all lubricated. This is where it's very important that our piston rings are centered on those locating pins. Okay, so both of them are in the proper place right now. Now we're going to compress the rings and we'll slide the cylinder onto the piston. Got to be careful to keep your piston rings in the proper position. Okay, so I've got them compressed. We'll slide our cylinder on. I'll pull the block out. This is just a piece of string. Everybody liked my expensive tool from Stihl. I paid a fortune for that. Now we're just going to make sure that our cylinder, the bolt holes, and the cylinder gasket all line up, and we'll torque this thing down. So it's hard to show you this, but if I look with a flashlight down the cylinder bolt holes, I can see that everything is lined up with the gasket nicely. So let's torque this thing down. OEM cylinder bolts should just drop right down in there. We'll torque those 4 bolts down to 11 Newton meters. Everything is turning nicely. I have a pretty good feeling about this, but I had a good feeling last time too, and we see how that turned out. Let's put a spark plug back in this. I know I put a new plug in it before we took it outside, but after what happened to it, I don't know if something hit the electrode. I'm not taking any chances. So let's put a brand new NGK BPMR 7A, gapped properly. Decomp plug. The threads don't feel real nice in this, but what do you expect for 49 Canadian pesos? Okay, well, let's put the muffler on this. Okay, so this hasn't been a direct fit. We've had to make some modifications to the muffler, which I didn't catch on film. It didn't come with the 2 studs for mounting the top cover. I don't have the studs. Couldn't get them out of the old one. So just a couple T27s cut off, So that's resolved. And then the original top cover, it won't fit properly. But I do have a brand new top cover that fits properly. So we'll just put this on it rather than me butchering this nice original cover. Well, now that we're past that, let's continue putting this thing back together. So this is the Tillotson carburetor that in part 2, you've seen us do some work to because it was leaking. We have used some silicone to try to seal it up. If I order a new carb for this, it'll be Zama carb. I know in the comments quite a few people talked about these carbs and what junk they are. One guy said take that thing right out in the woods and throw it as far as you can. So we're going to put it on here and just see how this thing runs. At this point, this is becoming more of an experiment than anything. So let's reinstall it and get this thing ready to cut wood again. The rim sprocket, I don't know if it has a front and back. I always install it with the writing facing me. But I suppose you could mount it that way if you wanted to. Well, there, our 034 Super is all back together with an aftermarket piston and cylinder, a new top cover, and a bit of a modified muffler. Had to add a couple washers here. This muffler doesn't attach properly to that cylinder. It was bending. So I guess some fresh gas and we go outside and see if we can blow this thing up again. Okay, what do you think? Will it run? I think it'll run. Let's go outside and find out. I'll meet you out there. Well, that thing starts and runs excellent. Let's put a bar and chain on this. We're going to take that guide piece off, and we're going to put that piece on. So the proper one for this saw, the bar studs would grip it and hold this on. See, there's no screw to hold this one on. This is the closest thing I have. So this is what we're going to use, and the bar will hold that in place. Okay, bar and chain are back on it. It is dark here, so we will cut with this first thing tomorrow morning. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, I hit a rock. It won't pull itself through the wood. It's just sitting there doing nothing. It looks sharp, but it is not sharp. So I'll go sharpen that again.
lot better. The idle's good. It's not, it was acting very strange. Something was telling me something was wrong. And I didn't think it would be so catastrophic. I'm happy with that. It doesn't have the power it should have, but it's an aftermarket piston and cylinder, so yeah.
I just went out to pick up some drinks for the guys, and in my travels, I came across some 362s. This is an M-tronic 362. He says the carb is not attached, but that it's in there, and it just needs to be reattached, and it'll run perfect. And this is a 362 non-M-tronic, and we're not sure what's wrong with this one. Some more gems to add to my collection. Well, this Stihl 034 Super runs and cuts excellent. If you've been following along, we bought this saw for $50 in the beer store parking lot. The day I picked it up, it had no bar, no chain, no clutch cover, and no bar studs. And as I was about to get back into the truck, the guy that I bought this from said, "Oh, one more thing. When I got it, the saw was locked up, and I put a new piston ring in it." I have 3 pages of notes here I've made during this whole process. It feels like I've been working on this thing for the last year. So when I picked it up, it was hard to start. The felling spike was being held on by a piece of wire. It was missing the bar studs. I already said that. It had the wrong clutch drum. It had a 325 clutch drum on it. Should have been full 3/8. So we have done quite a lot of work to this. We tore this saw down almost completely. We replaced everything that needed replacing. I have a paper towel here full of parts that came off this thing. We've had the carb off and did a kit in it, plus some silicone because we couldn't get it to seal back up. I could order and put a new carb on this, but we'll see what happens here. This saw got way more involved than I expected. So carb kit's been done. The oil cap was broken, so it has a new oil cap. We found a homemade cylinder gasket, so it has a new OEM gasket. I replaced the muffler gasket while we had it off. We replaced the oil line that was leaking. Tyler did that, and he hurt himself doing it. Original spark plug, and then the spark plug that was in it when we blew it up, so it now has a brand new spark plug in it. It has a new fuel filter. It has a new impulse line. We replaced both crank seals with new Stihl OEM crank seals. They weren't leaking, but I don't know if they're original. I don't know if they're aftermarket. We just did them for peace of mind. It has a new aftermarket piston, cylinder, piston rings, a matching set, new rim sprocket. I have pieces here, just broken piston ring from when we blew it up in part 2. If you missed part 2, you'll probably want to go back and see that, or start at part 1. This is going to be a 3-part saw. There's our smashed up piston, the old cylinder. It might be savable, but I don't know. There's quite a bit of damage. There's dents in the top. There's pieces of the piston smashed to the top of it. I'm not really sure. We ended up with a new top cover because the original top cover wouldn't fit anymore because of the aftermarket cylinder. All kinds of stuff. So we now have a running cutting Stihl 034 Super. It's not original. I like original saws with original hardware and original plastics, but this saw is a bit of a mutt. But that's okay. It runs, it cuts, and the whole point of this was to go and buy the saw for $50 and see what it would take to make it run again. It would have been a lot quicker if we didn't blow it up in the process, but that's what happened. Let's talk about two things that go together really well: old chainsaws and money. So if you were to go buy this chainsaw for $50 and bring it home without a bar and a chain and a clutch cover and bar studs, and you didn't have that stuff just lying around, you had to go buy everything to fix this, let's talk about that. So I paid $50 cash for this chainsaw. The gasket set, which includes a new cylinder gasket, crank seals, that kit is $25. The piston and cylinder that I ordered off of Amazon, aftermarket, was $49. Now, if we hadn't blown the saw up, we wouldn't have needed that, but that's what we ordered. The OEM piston and cylinder from Stihl is $500. That's not an option. The bar studs, let's say $10. Miscellaneous hardware, our felling spike was being held on by a piece of farmer's wire, so we did need some pieces of hardware, let's say $10. A new impulse line, a new oil line, a new rim sprocket, a carb kit, a fuel filter, a spark plug, OEM circlips, the guide plate that was missing, the top cover, which we had to replace because it wouldn't fit on top of the aftermarket. So if we hadn't blown this up, we wouldn't need that. The oil cap that's broken. I replaced the circlip that holds everything on in the clutch side because it was just loose and I didn't like how loose it was. We replaced one little missing tank vent part. And then we've got the bar chain clutch cover. In Canada, we can call that bar and chain there $100 Canadian. And that metal clutch cover is $74 Canadian. And we still have the original Tillotson carburetor that is siliconed. I can order a new carb for this. It's $170 plus 13% tax. It's a good thing I'm doing this for fun and not for money. So you can see how the costs just add up here, especially with the little accident we had with it. So with a bar and chain and a clutch cover, if I had to go and buy them right now, I would say I have about $500 into this chainsaw. If we hadn't blown this thing up, we'd have a lot less into it, but we wouldn't have had all the fun and the laughs we had. Tyler and I had a good time playing around with this thing, and it's time to move on to the next saw. Over the last year, you guys have seen me tear into a few saws that need work, they need rebuilds, they need piston cylinders, and I've got them all sitting here. I've got the parts ordered for them. I have a list over here of everything that's waiting for me, and this has kind of got me in the mood to do some rebuilds. So I have a Stihl 026 sitting over here, and the very first chainsaw video I ever made was about that 026. I was wearing a gray Stihl hoodie, and I was kind of nervous because it was my first video. I just rewatched it, and it was kind of cringy to watch it. But anyways, we may start with that next. I've got an aftermarket piston and cylinder here for it. So let's go grab an 026 and get it rebuilt. Thank you for being here for all of this. I know it's a lot of content, but hopefully you learned something. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.